So this is a continuation on identifying interventions for students and children. There are certain competencies that you need to have in order for you to be the kind of person who can get folks to do the interventions. You have self-awareness about what your theories are, what your personal values are, what your interpersonal style is. You also have to have awareness of the person you're working with to try and get the intervention in place and their interpersonal styles, their values, and their theories. You yourself need to have good interpersonal communication skills. You need to know about the intervention itself, so you have to be familiar with the intervention before you try teaching it to someone else. So, and this talks about here, especially in problem solving and ABA. Problem solving will be addressed in consultation coursework, and ABA will be addressed in behavior management coursework. And then you have to understand how school systems work, and you have to understand how consultation works. And again, that's going to be handled in consultation coursework. And then you have to find interventions and work with individuals in a culturally sensitive manner. All right, and that should be addressed throughout all of your coursework, but in addition, there is coursework specific to this area. All right, so when we're talking to teachers and they come to us and say, I'm having a problem with Jimmy, we have to really kind of think about that from the perspective of the teacher. And so there's a couple of things that teachers tend to think, accurate or not, that's still some things that teachers tend to think. Oftentimes, the teacher will assume that the problem belongs to the child and not the system. So they'll talk about their classroom is fine, it's the child that has the problem. A lot of times, teachers don't really see these IATs, I've been calling them SSTs, they don't really see them as a method of getting support to change the system. They just see them as a method of checking a box so the child can be referred to find out if they have a disability or not. A lot of times, teachers don't see the role of a school psychologist as a consultant. Often they will see a school psychologist as diagnostic specialists. It's true that we are diagnostic specialists, but we are also consultants. Sometimes teachers won't come to get help because of egos. They'll just say, I don't want to let anybody know, I don't know what I'm doing, or they just don't want to be seen as not being an expert. And then finally, I've gone to her before and she didn't help me at all. So they may not seek out help. And, if you've been unsuccessful with them in the past, that is a good indicator that you may be, that they think, oh, well, she's not going to be, or he's not going to be successful for me in the future. So you have to keep that in mind when you're working with the individual, that if you fail to meet their needs, and for them to see change, it's likely that they will not come to you again. Or, if you're not the school psychologist at that school or the consultant at that school, but somebody else is, they may say, well, that person, that school psychology person, that role hasn't helped me in the past either. So it is really important, if you want to advocate for consultation and setting up interventions, that you start off with things that show success so that the teacher really will trust you. So when you're doing consultation, there's also some other things to work on, that these meetings often interfere with teachers' schedules. To try and get all of the people together on these SSTs to all get in the same room to be able to talk, usually that means that either somebody's missing class, which is not what they want to do, or it's done before school, after school, or during lunch. And that time belongs to the teachers. It's difficult to convince them that they need to spend it doing something that they don't really see as valuable. So you need to help them see the value by helping them make change that affects the child. Sometimes teachers, when if you meet a teacher in the hallway and they say, "How are you doing?" You say, "Busy," or "Tired," or "This has been a weird week." Like, it's good to create rapport with the teachers, but on the other hand, if they have an issue, they may not come to you because they may see you as overwhelmed or not able to help them. Another one is sometimes, the teacher might come up to you or you might come up to the teacher and say, hey, do you have a minute? Consultation and introducing interventions is not a hallway conversation. It's not a minute. It usually means that you need to set aside at least 20 minutes. And again, when you're talking about kids, there are legal restrictions, FERPA and HIPAA, where you can't be discussing this information in a public area about a child's either academic or mental health struggles. Now, you say there's all these things. I'm saying, well, you can't do it then, and you can't do it then, and you can't do it then. If the administrators buy into this idea of trying to get intervention and prevention works in their school, they will help provide a method to have this work. They'll set aside some teacher time, or they'll give an extra, a sub to come in and help with the teacher, or they'll find some way to help with the logistics. So that is just something to remember, is that when teachers find success, they'll go back to the administrators and say, hey, this has really been helpful. I need more of this. And then once the administrators see your benefit, they'll start pulling you to work with other teachers. And if it's in their interest and the school's interest, they'll make accommodations for you. So there's just certain things you have to look at. It has to be effective. So you have to know that you have research that support it works. It also has to be acceptable, which means it has to be reasonable. They have to be able to do it in a reasonable amount of time. They're not going to want something that's going to take 3 years. They want something that's going to take between 6 and 12 weeks. Reasonable in terms of money. You can't ask for them to have ridiculous amounts of things. Appropriate for that classroom, and the teacher's got 36 children having 5 different individual interventions going on, in addition to the children who receive differentiated instruction for special ed and another who receive differentiated instruction for English as a second language. The more complicated the intervention, the less appropriate it is for that class. Also, sometimes if the teacher doesn't believe it's going to work, they're just going to stop doing it. So one of the really good things to do with interventions is to show them early. Hey, look, you've been doing this for 2 weeks, and see the data shows that he has improved by 3 points, right? And then previous experiences of success and unsuccessful interventions, the more you can show that they're working and that you're helping, the more likely they are to be acceptable for future stuff you're going to do. And then finally, you have durability, which is when you're not in the picture anymore, will the teacher continue to use that intervention? Or will they just stop? So durability includes, will they continue to have the resources they need? Let's say it's a computer-based intervention. You got it for them, you set it up, but the subscription to it ends at the end of the year. Okay, so now the teacher doesn't have access to it, which means it's not very durable. Let's say that it's not durable because, durability could be something that flat out breaks. So it's a computer-based intervention, but the computer that they have doesn't work very well and it breaks down. It could be not durable because the teacher is absent quite often, and if the teacher is the only one who understands how to do it, and it can't be transferred to the subs very easily, then it's not going to work. So you have to determine. First, you have to find the interventions that are effective. Next, you have to make sure that you figure out how to match the interventions that you identify and choose the right one based off of acceptability of it and the durability of it. So you have a scenario here where you have a teacher that's attending your in-service training on a computer-based reading program. So this is that article that you would have listened to in part 1 or would have analyzed in part 1. Think through all of these issues here. So let me give you a little bit more background on this teacher. You have a teacher who is, so you've attended this in-service training. You put on a training that said, here's this program we have before. Teacher says, yeah, I've heard all this stuff before. This is a 4th grade teacher. Actually, no, this is a kindergarten teacher. Sorry. A kindergarten teacher. You're trying to get this involved in their class. And this teacher has been teaching for 15 years. Um, and she's not super comfortable with the use of technology. All right, so what are some things that you think you could do before, during, and after to make this, so you first already have determined if you thought that it was effective. So now we're looking at acceptability and durability. What are things that you could do to help counter this belief of, yeah, I've heard it all before? Okay, so I'm going to have you pause and you're going to come back after you've had a chance to write this in your notes. All right, welcome back. We're going to go on to the next slides. But hold on, before we do that, let me go ahead and go through some options for you. Some things that you can do to make it seem reasonable to the teacher and durable, is to make sure that you're the one to install it, that maybe you write up some step-by-step instructions that the teacher is going to need to use so that it's easy for them. Make sure that maybe you put the link to the software program directly on the website. Directly on the desktop, so that when they open it up, they can see it. They just have to click on it, and then the child can get involved and get working. You have to think, do you think this is even an appropriate one for a teacher who's not super tech savvy? So you would need to do maybe some investigation about, what does not tech savvy mean? Does it mean that they don't know how to send an email or turn a computer on? Or does it mean they don't know how to code, their own software? Different people define those terms differently, so you would want to do that. Is this a teacher? So the teacher says, yeah, I've heard all this before, which means that she doesn't think it's going to work or that it's going to make any kind of difference. So you have to remember that that is the opinion that you have going in. So what are some things that you can do during the intervention? Meet every couple of weeks and show the improvement that's happening. Or if it's not happening, say it's not happening and change it to a different intervention. And we'll talk more about that in future discussions. And you need previous experience in successful and unsuccessful interventions. So the question is, if you think this one is really going to work, you have a teacher who doesn't know that it's going to work or make any difference, and you're like, I don't know if this one's going to be the one that's going to fix or not. Try and get your most efficacious, the largest effect size, best done study that matches closest to her classroom. And that's the one you need to be choosing first anyway, but particularly with teachers who already think it's not going to work. And then durability, this is going to be, all right, so you've gotten it. How much is this software program going to cost? Are they able to get a multi-year, maybe a grant or something? What is it about this that will work and will not continue to work? And what resources are needed for you to make the teacher feel like that they can handle this when you're gone? All right, so the assessing intervention accessibility. There are all kinds of ways to do this. There are rating scales for intervention acceptability. You can just meet with them, meet with them once a week, once every couple of days, whatever it is, just to talk to them qualitatively. You can observe them actually doing the intervention. You can have them do some sort of program evaluation. And then there's the difference between formative and summative evaluation. Formative is done as you go along to see, are we seeing that it's working and it's acceptable as you go along. Whereas summative would be, we did the entire thing and now we're looking at, did it work after the program is completed. All right. So how do we enhance the entire class since not simply one student? This depends on if you see this as a student issue. And it doesn't have to be a disability issue. It can be that the student, for instance, missed 2 weeks. And those were the 2 weeks that they talked about fractions. And so if it's just that student needs support in learning how to do fractions, that's going to be a different framework for discussion than if the entire class is kind of struggling with fractions. So one size does not fit all. And so you have to really kind of think about this in terms of, what are the kind of interventions and needs work at a tier 1 level that the whole class gets? Different ones are going to take hold for just the tier 2 level, the ones who are referred, and then the ones who need more individual support, they'll be at the tier 3 level. So you want to aim for the lowest tier that you can. If this is going to help solve problems for all of the children or most of the children, you want to find something that's going to help the whole class. But if the whole class doesn't need help, then you need to target the children who need help. All right? And so when you're supporting teachers through learning, and when you're developing the materials for them to be able to use to do the interventions, it's really important that you think about Vygotsky. Vygotsky has something called zone of proximal development. If you don't know it, you've got to learn it because it's really the foundation of a lot of the pedagogy that teachers use to teach. I like to think of zone of proximal development as described some other places as I+1. So I+1 means you find out exactly how the person, what they're able to do, and then in order to teach them, you give them one more unit of information. If you give them 2 or 3 more units, it's too advanced, it's too fast, and they're going to get bored or fail. If you give them exactly what they know, they're going to get bored and not learn anything. And if you give them less than what they know, I-1, then they're going to be bored and probably cause problems because they're bored. And so the goal is always to teach that I+1. And that's really hard when you have a class of 30. But for what we're talking about here, which is you're teaching the teachers how to do these interventions, I+1 is what does the teacher know already? So going back to that computer-based intervention, what does the teacher know about computers? And then I'm not going to teach her everything else about computers. I'm just going to teach her a little bit more. And once she feels mastered of that, then a little bit more. I+1 until she's where she needs to be. Okay? So a lot of times verbal instructions with printed materials may be some sort of handout or worksheet so that when you're gone, step number 1, turn on the computer. Step number 2, wait for it to load, log in. Step number 3, click on this icon and a picture of the icon. Going through that so that when you're not there provides them with guidance. Hands-on assistance is even better. You know, the first couple of weeks, you say, oh, you're going to do this program for an hour each day. I'm going to make sure that I'm there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of the first 2 weeks and give some time to make sure that we get everything started. So that's kind of with the coaching idea, provide feedback, and then make sure that they know that if they have questions or concerns that they can reach out to you and they can get a response quickly. So this zone of proximal development is that idea of where can a person learn, where is their I+1. So you want to assess and maximize the treatment integrity. Treatment integrity is, are they actually going to do what they say they're going to do? However, if the more complex the intervention is, the less likely they are to do it correctly. They may want to do it correctly, but it just might be too difficult, have too many moving parts, etc. The more resources it needs in terms of time and money, the less that they may do it with integrity. They're going to start, oh, well, we can substitute this for that, or kind of make this other thing. And eventually, what they're doing is not what was originally researched. If it needs a lot of people to help, probably not going to get done with integrity. If they don't see that it's going to work, they're probably not going to do it. And if people don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. And so there is this idea of treatment integrity is who is telling you, how many people are telling you what they're doing, how many of you observe doing it, etc. So here's some just general solutions to making the integrity work better. Avoid complex strategies, try and use simpler ones. Try not to make it too expensive. Make sure that there's a written plan, everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Provide actual indirect training. Again, demonstrate to them that they can see that it's working. Provide data. A formative evaluation is going on. And then make sure that you continue to observe and praise them and show them. The reward for the teacher is not going to be candy or teacher attention or whatever. The reward for the teacher is going to be seeing the data that shows that it's actually working. So there's all kinds of ways that you can teach a teacher these interventions. Pre-service training. So this is pre-service teachers are basically students, like they're undergrad or graduate students who are learning to be teachers. So you can include this as part of their teacher training. You could do it as an in-service for current teachers, so that way you could get at a larger number of teachers. You could do it as a computer-based training, so they sit down and they learn how to do this using a computer-based instruction for the teacher to learn how to do it. Peer training. Peer training works really well if you have team teachers. So if you have a fifth grade team, you find the teacher who's the most powerful voice, you teach them, and then they teach the other ones. And then using some sort of SST or IAT or whatever. You want to make sure that stakeholders who are involved, and so stakeholders are bigger than just the teachers. These are pretty much everybody who's affected. So parents, consultants, teachers, administrators, students. Sometimes stakeholders can also be employers. You know, when these children graduate from high school, what do they do after that? You know, what jobs are they going out to hold? What universities do they tend to be going to? And what are those stakeholders at that level wanting for their, for your kids to know, for them to have the skills to do what they need to do? And then you need to make sure that you provide support for them in their classrooms, their offices, their homes, wherever they are where the intervention needs to be put in place. And then cultural diversity, always, always, always remember that just because an intervention was shown as effective in a research study doesn't mean that it applies to everybody. So we talked about, a lot of folks will skip the methods and results section, and we talked about some guidelines to learning and reading the results section. It's really important to me that you also read the methods section, particularly the subjects. Are the kids in the study similar to the kids that you're working with? So if you're working with, if you're working with third grade students, and the kids are actually in seventh grade, it's probably that we're in the study. It's probably not as good a fit as you might want. If you're working with a 90% African American population, and the study was done on a 90% Caucasian population, that may or may not. So you need to look at other factors related to the children and look at the intervention itself to see if this would be transferable. Um, all of these things may change. And when we talk about cultural diversity, particularly when you're doing consultation, you have your own culture and the way that you think, speak, act, etc. All the things that believe, all of those things that make up a culture. Um, you have the culture of the person you're working with, the teacher or the parent or whoever the stakeholder is. And then you have the culture of the child. So you may have three different cultural issues going on at a single time, and make sure that you're considering everyone's cultural needs and cultural competencies when making decisions. And this becomes even more complicated when you have linguistic differences as well. So it is vital that you consider any intervention and any population listed in any study as how well will this transfer to the kid that's sitting in front of you. So I hope that this gave you an idea of where to start for selecting interventions.